Hello, and welcome to another fully live news episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Kody KIlian. I'm a security researcher at Varonis, and today we have our good friend and fellow hacker Kilian here to talk about the security news. Kilian, thank you for joining us at our new semi-official late time.
Yeah, no, this is perfect. Thanks for having me on. Definitely works better, a little bit nicer middle of the road time.
Hello, Emmanuel, Kurt, and Q, everybody else hanging out in the chat. I find that actually this time works pretty well for people, and our chat has been more lively as we've been doing it a little bit later. So we're kind of relaxing into this time slot. If you like it, let us know. If you hate it, I think you're in the minority, but please also let us know. But yeah, lots to talk about. And as usual, I'd like to highlight some security tools or things that I've been researching. And I wanted to show off a little bit more of what we talked about on the Q&A last time, which is long-range communication with microcontrollers, with like little devices. So this could be any sort of prototype you want to make. If you want to be able to trigger it from up to several miles away, there is a technology that allows you to do this called LoRa. So without further ado, let me show off these modules. So on the left of this, which I'm going to blow up, and I'm still getting used to Mastodon. I'm going to open this in a new tab. Let's just do that. So if I really want to get in there, I can see that on the left, I have this little module right here with like a curly Q antenna. And this module was about $13 just for one of them. So it's also in the shape of a dove, which I find to be adorable. And it uses UART, so like a USB style protocol in order to communicate. So that means I only need to wire up power, ground, and then two wires, receive and send RxTX, and I'm good to go. So obviously the wiring on this one, pretty elegant. Like I can make a pair of these for, like $12, $13 each. And it's relatively easy to use because it takes what are called AT commands. So I have to send like AT send, and then like the device I'm trying to send it to, and then the length of the payload, and then the payload. So I wrote a little wrapper in CircuitPython that does all that for me. So I just type a string I want to send, it formats the AT command automatically for me, and then this acts as the little radio. So I'm actually going to show this off on the stream. Maybe, I guess we'll try and see if it works. But I want to contrast this to the other option. So this rat's nest of wires is the LoRa radio that I was showing off last week. So this uses a different protocol called SPI, or Serial Peripheral Interface. I think that's what it stands for. So this allows you to add serial peripheral devices like sensors or radios or other things to a microcontroller. And this takes 7 wires. And obviously, it's nothing crazy, but it's a little visually overwhelming. It's not as clean. Now this costs about I'm going to say $4 on AliExpress. So the contrast is like, in order to make a pair of radios, you're looking at $8 for these two with all the crazy wires on one side, and you're looking at like $40 or so for the one on this side. So, with like shipping and whatnot. And this one isn't even available on AliExpress. So it's interesting that there's 2 different options here if you want to get started doing this sort of research. One of them is kind of cool because honestly, you could plug this one into a Linux computer with a like FTDI friend or some other way of interfacing with a UART device. And from Python, just send commands over LoRa and receive things over LoRa by just plugging this right in. So obviously this one is the more like expensive, like fancier way of getting into this if you want. But if you were to want to make like a device that's just like able to be triggered from super far away, you could buy one of these radios that's like, $3 or $4, wait a month for it to be delivered by AliExpress. That's an exaggeration. It's like 3 weeks, but still it feels like a month. And then boom, you can have this ultra low power device that can receive commands from really, really far away. So Kilian, have you seen or interacted with LoRa devices before?
No, aside from us sort of prepping and talking about this, it's new to me. This is not, I'm curious about it, but this is not my forte.
Yeah, so like I hadn't really I thought that this was kind of like a niche field of like, you know, radio stuff where like it was maybe like super remote, like Arctic sensors would use this or whatever,
Right.
but it's actually woven into a lot of IoT products nowadays. So like
Interesting.
Philips Hue smart bulbs, they got tired of negative reviews from people saying, "Oh my, you know, like my bulb doesn't work," because like you can't control how someone sets up their home Wi-Fi network. You just can't.
Right.
So like there's gonna be blind spots. They're gonna put light bulbs in places that it can't reach. So Philips Hue switched over to like a LoRa architecture where their lights actually connect over a LoRa network to be able to have incredible range where people stop complaining, basically. So
now,
let
me interrupt real quick. Does this how is this related to like Matter and Thread? Because I know those are the other like big emerging like protocols and things like that.
So LoRa's trade-off is that it has a proprietary like spectrum spread that it does that allows it to communicate over a long distance, but the trade-off is bandwidth. So the more data you send, the less the range is that it's able to be successfully decoded. So if you're decoding like if you're sending like a very small value, like a single bit, or like, you know, an on and off, or like a trigger, like if something's detected, then it becomes an incredibly flexible network. But as soon as you start using it as like a texting platform, it starts to really like show its problems. So all these different all these different like protocols are generally like kind of more towards the IoT, like small messages, long range, like kind of idea. So I haven't heard of those specifically, but I know that if they're designed to fill the same niche, that's generally the trade-off that they're making. It's like this incredible range, but it's usually in like an unlicensed spectrum. Like in this case, it's 915 megahertz, I believe, which is like a scientific unlicensed spectrum that you're free to use. And that makes it really cool because it's less locked down. It can be pretty powerful. Although in my range testing, I had two different contenders. I had, let me see if I can get another picture of what they look like operating. Here we go. Yes. So this one, as I said, it is in the shape of a dove, which I think is charming and cute. And it has an antenna that's like, you know, the antenna meant for it. So it comes with the antenna like on it in a protected like plastic case, which was really nice, by the way. And this, I got like to the edge of my neighborhood, which is admittedly kind of a large neighborhood. So I'd say I got about a mile with this one. And then with the other one, where I literally fashioned an antenna just out of a wire, like sticking out of it, I got even less. So maybe like a quarter of a mile, maybe at the very outset, like a half mile. So yeah, so this was the other one that I did where I improvised this like black wire coming off of the side of it is actually just an antenna that I fashioned. I did cut it to the correct length, I'm pretty sure, and that really matters. So that's probably why I'm not getting as good of a signal on this one that I made my own antenna. But I will say it really does matter to get this incredible range that a lot of people are claiming. You need to do a couple specific things. And one of them is make sure it has as good of a like line of sight connection as possible. But yeah, so obviously IoT people love this because it means you can have remote stuff. Home automation people love it because it means that no matter how terrible you've laid out your home Wi-Fi network, you're still going to get great results for turning your lights on and off, or smart plugs, or whatever you want to do. And as a prototyper, that means you can make smart plugs and smart lights and whatever else that work over LoRa really easily. Like making a LoRa remote is like, you know, the cost is going to be whatever the microcontroller you're using to control it, plus like a $3, $4 like board for each device you want to add. LoRa also supports some really cool projects, and one of them I keep getting shout outs for is Meshtastic. So Meshtastic is a specific protocol where you can connect over Bluetooth to this little microcontroller and send messages over a connected LoRa network where all of these nodes connect to each other and pass messages along. So if even one of them has like a connection to the outside, then all of them technically do, which is really cool. So people who like distributed or mesh networking really like these LoRa devices. So I just wanted to shout out, if you're interested in these sort of things, I'm going to be putting together some guides on using both the fancy, the Mercedes of the LoRa modules, and then also the that's another thing, the Medusa of the LoRa modules, where you have like substantially more of these wires. Now, if you want to go somewhere in the middle, there's also some great Adafruit boards that have this exact same LoRa radio built in. So, and it's a lot less messy. So if you want to just go to a straight intermediary solution, then that's probably the best way to go. But yeah, I found this to be surprisingly easy to work with. And for the UART example, I have been using CircuitPython. So I had to use Arduino for this example, and Random Nerd Tutorials does a great job of explaining like how this works and using existing libraries to make this pretty plug and play for anybody to get two devices communicating. But I needed to compile it, and that's not something that everybody wants to do. So over here, because I'm communicating over UART and I'm basically just sending commands over a serial connection, and this is handling kind of everything as like its own modem, I was able to use CircuitPython and I didn't need to compile anything. And I have to say, of the two experiences, this one over here, the one in the shape of the dove, it was a lot easier for me to learn. So if you've got some cash to burn and you want a cute little module that's like easy to write, you know, like Python for, then I have to say, this has been my coolest thing of the week, finding out that for a hacker anyway, I could leave an implant or a device with this little LoRa module and then trigger it with like a drone flying like 3 or 4 miles away. That's actually practical. Like I've seen people observing like incredible line of sight, like range on this sort of thing. So I'm going to be trying out probably over the weekend a drone-based line of sight and see how far can I actually get a signal from this if it's exposed outside and I have something that is over the horizon and able to receive. So we'll see what the results are. So far, I'm not super impressed, honestly. But then again, I'm doing that from inside of a house, like as in going down a hill. So I feel like that could be maybe why, but we'll see. James also has an answer for you. He says that Matter is not a physical layer. Thread is a physical layer like LoRa, though. Thread is very similar to LoRa.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. There you go.
Another comment. You can do Matter over Thread or Wi-Fi. It's a protocol. All right. Got it. Also, I see
wonder if we could do
from Twitter, formerly from X, formerly Twitter, someone from Holland. Hello. It's good to have some Dutch followers. I was just eating a bunch of stroopwafels today and thinking about my Dutch hacker friend. So it's good to see you.
So I wonder if we could do Matter over LoRa.
I mean, possibly. It seems like it would definitely be possible. I'm able to kind of format custom like packets and stuff with LoRa, and the ability to manipulate the radio seems to be like relatively low level, which is cool. Well, except on this one. This one seems to be pretty formulaic, but the other one like seems to be you can go as deep as you want, which is cool. All right, so let's. I want to show just quickly how this works. So I'm going to try plugging these in. I've got two boards. One of them is the sender and the second is the receiver. And I believe I have them set to automatically go. So I'll turn off the screen for a second and just show. So this is my CircuitPython receiver board. It says waiting for packets. And I'm going to put this here. And then I also have the sender board. And I've configured this one to be an automated beacon. So when I plug this in, it should start automatically sending. Ooh, I'm nervous. Is this going to disconnect? Okay, no, we're good. So this is automatically going to start sending like hello and then a number. So I get an index of how many have been sent versus how many have been received. So I am now getting sending test 3, sending test 4, signal strength. Okay, so I'm getting a signal strength. I'm getting all of that. And these are two I mean, obviously they're not very far apart, so this isn't exactly like a long range test, but just getting two devices talking to each other is relatively simple to do. I did this in about an hour last night, so I actually realized that I don't think I'm even outputting to serial. Let's see, is anything coming up on this? Yes, no, I'm not outputting the serial anyway, so so it's not going to show anything interesting, but it's pretty easy to get this all running and to make it so that you can have two devices communicate over a relatively long range. You just need to manage your expectations a little bit. So super cool technology. Again, dropping down to about $3 if you want to buy a radio and start experimenting with this, but obviously you're going to want like 2 of them. So yeah, just have to give this a shout out if you're looking for kind of the bleeding edge of where like IoT is going and where you might be able to find some interesting security vulnerabilities. LoRa is an interesting protocol. So if you want to do research on IoT stuff, if you want to be able to learn how these devices communicate and maybe how to like, attack them, then this is the equipment you need. And this is how you can build your own prototypes, learning how to do that. So I really enjoyed that this week. Let's see. So we also have some research that I promised to talk about This is from our very own Varonis Threat Labs, of which I have like 4 really badass cool stickers from, and I need more because I really like their logo. So I think I said on the last stream that I don't really get to talk about these until they fully come out, because a lot of them are like so bad that the vendors need time to like patch and make sure that those patches go out and like get fully adopted before we're allowed to talk about it. So we're going to talk a little bit about NTLM hashes. And Kilian, you work more with Windows systems. Do you know, how would you describe NTLM hashes to a beginner?
Oh, to a beginner, it's an old way, I guess, simplified as much as possible. It's an old way to store like the password. It's fairly weak, and it's been replaced by much better ways to work with things like Kerberos or something. But it's an old legacy way to basically store like password data, more or less. That's not a particularly accurate way, but that's it. It's a NTLM hash basically.
Yeah, and it seems like I had never heard of it until like not that long ago, and I guess the biggest takeaway for me was that it's similar to what I'm used to, like a WPA hash, and that it is as vulnerable as the password that it's protecting. So if you have like a really like dead simple password, then it's not going to be protected because it could be brute forced if the password is weak. So I think it said somewhere that it's there we go. Yes, it's in
password. Yeah,
it is password equivalent. So if your password sucks, then this is as good as revealing your password, which is why it's really important to keep these hashes safe. Now, usually these hashes are, and Kilian, please correct me if I'm wrong, because like I know my way around Windows like not at all. But these hashes are used to authenticate, usually to internal systems within a network, like in a corporate network or something like that, to sign a user into different services. So they basically will like send it over, and then if someone's allowed to access a resource or whatever, then it'll load. So Varonis Threat Labs went ahead and found a way to get these hashes by sending phishing emails. And the Outlook and some of these other exploits required a user to click on something, but looked extremely benign and had no warnings whatsoever. And the idea here is that somebody would get an email with a link that looks like it's from their organization. They would click on it, they would open it, and then as soon as they do, it would actually be sending their hash to a remote object where the attacker would be able to get it, brute force it, and then use that hash to sign into services in the organization, effectively compromising that person's account. So obviously that's not very good. So let's go through how it works. The Outlook exploit includes just these 2 strings. And what this does is it has the attacker's IP address where they're listening for the hash here. And then it uses the second line to point the victim's Outlook to the attacker's machine when making a request to access content. So a little attack scenario here that's kind of just describing that same thing, but the attacker would get an email, click on open this iCal, and then as soon as that was opened, it would proceed to send over that hash via this like triggering pair of strings to the attacker as they're just like sitting there waiting for the hash. And that means if the hash is particularly weak, the hacker could immediately get access to that victim's account by signing in as the victim. The other 2 attacks are also pretty clever. One of them is using uniform resource indicators or uniform resource identifiers, sorry. And these are things that identify different sets of resources that different applications need. So for example, HTTP or mail to are 2 examples where if you click on a mail to link, it pops open your default email client. So WPA is Windows Performance Analyzer, and it's something that's included in their software development kit, which means if you're a developer, you more than likely have this installed on your system. So Varonis threat researchers were able to find a way to use this to craft a link where when you click on a benign link in a phishing email, it redirects you to this link that pops up this request asking to open WPA. So this is where I think that like it might get stopped in some cases, where like if the user clicks, cancel, then it won't happen.
Yeah.
But it's still an attack that works, and it's something that as soon as you click on open, it sends your hash, and the attacker would be able to brute force it. So the last one is a little bit different. So the last one is using Windows File Explorer, which is installed on all Windows systems. That kind of like means that this attack could be spread to basically anybody running Windows. So Explorer allows you to obviously browse your files and folders, and it's also a lot more trusted than this random like WPA pop-up. So there are cases where, like you'll have a password forwarding link that attempts to open up an application on your computer and uses a link like this to function. So if you are used to that sort of thing, you might not find something that's opening up an Explorer tab to be super unusual. Like that seems like kind of like a more normal thing to open. So the way that Varonis Threat Labs was able to do this was using the search MS URI handler, making a query and then adding a subquery. And the subquery is where they were able to point an authentication at an attacker supply or an attacker monitored IP address. So they also came up with a second scenario, which let's see. Okay, yeah. The crumb parameter. So they also had a second parameter that was able to do effectively the same thing. So the kind of like general attack isn't just able to be run from the one from the first one that we showed. Where is it? This is such a long. Here we go. So we have the subquery, which is the first way of doing this. And then the second way, after all these other images, is the crumb. So the crumb equals location, and then just the attacker machine. This one is like a little shorter. So it just means that it's basically the same technique of using the search MS and then like directing it at an attacker controlled system. It looks very similar, which is why I got confused between the two. But the effect is basically the same. It's using the crumb parameter to specify a path for a search, but instead of pointing it internally, it's pointing it externally, which you are not supposed to do. Okay, so a little bit technical, and that's why I like to kind of go through and like explain like why they matter, because I again had not heard of this particular type of hash until fairly recently, until I first saw this research. So cool explainer on why if you get an email that contains one of these like URI based links that tries to open up an application, even if it's a trusted application, this is now a technique that can be used to potentially point some part of that request at an external resource, when typically these are used for like internal resources or launching an application on your computer. So yeah, I have to say, like, this was like I've seen those emails go out before, and I've also not really been exposed to the switcheroo attack that they were talking about here, where you have a normal link that looks totally fine, and then you click on it, and then it redirects you to one of these where it pops up. So you can have something that looks like a relatively like normal, simple link, or like, an open this now, and then it goes to a URL and then pops us up, where it's pretty plausible that like what's being opened is something that would be a normal part of an application authenticating or something like that. So be on the lookout for these sorts of attacks. I think some that I could imagine is like if you get one of those like single, how would I describe it? Like the emails that allow you to sign in without a password, like a passwordless sign in, like those are kind of like the perfect lure for some of these applications, where an attack like this might actually be trying to steal a hash or redirecting an application's data to an external source. So I didn't even know this was possible. And it's a little, it's making me think a little bit more carefully about opening any link that I get sent via email, especially if it looks official.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of in the Windows world, actually it says right there, the relay attack, where, pass the hash. Plenty you can do if you can get a hold of that hash. And oftentimes, like we see, James mentioned curb roasting there, but oftentimes we see attackers trying to get, like a downgrade or something to NTLM, because it is vulnerable to brute force or directly, again, passing the hash.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of different attacks that are enabled by this. So yeah, just be careful with opening email links, in particular if they have those URI indicators. So I already showed this off, but just proud of this LoRa thing working. Let's see what else I've got this week. Oh, so this was one of my favorite stories. So like security researchers love to like mess with these AI tools, and of course like some hackers messing around with this tool that basically they wanted to see no forever block. Hackers trying to see if this had any safeguards built into it started feeding like toxic ingredients into this recipe generator to see like what it would do. And of course, it didn't warn people that it was potentially creating toxic gas.
Yeah.
Oh, ant poison flavored jelly. That's another really great thing to recommend. Instead, it started recommending some combinations of ingredients like aromatic water mix, which is apparently water, bleach, and ammonia.
Oh, great.
Aromatic, it definitely is. So obviously, like it's not gonna. The system wasn't generating like ideas for toxic stuff like on its own. Like it was kind of being pushed towards this and given ingredients that could potentially be mixed into something toxic. But the fact that it was willing to also generate methanol bliss and yeah, I think the ant poison flavored jelly is another one that I was not a fan of. You know, like when we implement these sorts of AI systems, they often don't have any sort of protection against edge cases where they don't expect that people are gonna maybe include by accident like a toxic ingredient, but they also don't look out for these potential interactions. So yeah, like having sort of these like lightly reskinned GPTs that are general purpose intelligences, but not specifically tuned for any particular thing. Unless you give it very specific instructions, it really can lack the context to be able to keep users safe in these sorts of instances. So yeah, aromatic water mix is going to be something I look out for now when warning people about what not to mix together.
There's going to be a whole subcategory of people they're going to have to hire to come up with these edge cases for this, because this is one of my things that I've been doing recently. I have a couple projects that I'm working on where I've been heavily using generative AI for stuff, and it's mostly trying to convince it to do things that it doesn't want to do because I need like test data for stuff. You know, like if you ask it to generate a list of like names, addresses, and potential like credit card numbers as an example, it's going to tell you no. But if you ask it in a specific way, it can and will do those. And I've been spending a lot of time on figuring out how to trick it.
Yeah, and I really find that these sorts of things, like think about this as code. If you give this thing a set of instructions and the output of that instruction is nonsense or toxic or harmful or or basically destructive to data, then you can really write some toxic bad code with AI if you're feeding it garbage or if you're not giving it the proper instructions. So I mean, just think of this as an analogy. If you can make a set effectively like toxic gas from giving the wrong ingredients to like a recipe suggester, imagine what you could do by giving bad instructions to a programming AI.
That's partially what I've been doing too. I've gotten to do a couple of things that really didn't want to. We'll leave it at that though.
So this is a gated article, so I'm not going to dignify it, but I will say we talked about Appen, a company from India that had a kind of sketchy past with like hacking for hire. And they've had most of their articles taken down. They've pursued like a legal fight against a lot of different publications that have talked about them. And now a lot of publications have joined together and are starting to talk more and more about this takedown effort. So I would love to share more about this with you, but Wired has told me that I have read enough of my free articles. So
real quick, I think we should talk about James's comment. There's a debate whether the recent data leak was actually AI generated, and Troy Hunt did a post about it. There's been a couple data leaks. Which one? There was like the mother of all data leaks where it was presumed to be a combination of a lot of different leaks, or is there something else that maybe
So
we're
if
going
I
to talk about later?
remember correctly from my Twitter doom scrolling, it was a private company was claiming that there was no data breach. So basically, you know how hackers operate, right? Like
Yes.
they'll dump data or like a sample of data and then say, we have all this data, like, and if you don't give us
Yep.
money, we're going to release it. So like what the company was saying was like, this data makes no sense. It looks like it was AI generated. This is basically somebody who has nothing attempting to cash in on this process that's like well anticipated by victims now. So like it looks like hackers have figured out that they maybe can pad data that like should be in like a proof of breach, like do that proof of breach and not actually have to do the work of doing a breach in the first place, which means like some companies could be having to really be careful about verifying the data that's been like provided, because if they don't, they could jump to the conclusion that we've been breached and instead actually be looking at plausible data that looks right, but like isn't actually indicative of a real breach. So really interesting to see how like you can fill in the information people expect in convincing ways, and it has a dramatic effect on like how people make decisions. So I haven't seen that before. Having a breach that's comprised of like falsified information at scale that's made by an AI is something that seems pretty new.
Yeah, there's been a lot of security news, and you get overwhelmed quickly with this. So,
all right. So we're going to talk about the continued fallout of that Okta attack. So obviously, any attack against like an authentication platform can result in fallout. So like if your company's business is securing other businesses, then a supply chain attack seems pretty likely. In this case, we talked about this Okta attack last year, and one of the victims of this was Cloudflare. So Cloudflare suspects that a nation-state attacker ran a sophisticated campaign in which they were able to get into all sorts of different production systems, attempting to gain information about Cloudflare's global infrastructure. So to access the systems, attackers used one access token and 3 service account credentials stolen during a previous compromise, which out of thousands of credentials, Cloudflare had failed to rotate. So Cloudflare detected the malicious activity, severed the hacker's access, and then 3 days later began investigating the incident. They rotated all their production credentials. And then this is what's really crazy about this attack. Okay. So the threat actors, again, these being like nation state actors attempting to like, use this big attack to do something very big and sneaky, tried hacking into Cloudflare's data center in São Paulo, Brazil, which was not yet in production, but those attempts failed. In spite of that, all equipment in Cloudflare's Brazil data center was returned to the manufacturer to ensure that the data center was 100% secure. So they were just like, you know what? Like if they connected to anything, burn it to the ground, re-image it, or just get rid of it. So apparently remediation efforts ended about a month ago. But the fact that like every single piece of equipment in their like Brazilian data center was just like sent back to the manufacturer because they didn't trust it anymore is evidence of how paranoid they are, I guess, based on the level of sophistication shown in this attack. Really, like seeing a super sophisticated threat actor go up against a security company is scary because it could really happen to anyone, especially when it's a supply chain attack and it's a vendor that you have no control over, like Okta getting popped. Like that's scary. So overall, like the full breadth of this attack is pretty stunning, and getting to see what these APT campaigns were like is pretty interesting. Like because they really were super specific about what they were going for. They were pretty surgical about their access and what they went after, and they really caused Cloudflare to send a very strong message with their response of just like torching their entire Brazilian data center.
I mean, it makes sense for all of what Cloudflare does. Like, it's a logical response to me. I mean, it seems extreme, but like, you can't, if there's any doubt, there's no doubt at all.
Yeah, that was quite the breach. And as soon as like, you know, it's like having any like password management company be involved in a breach is obviously scary. Oh, and look at that. The hackers who breached Okta's customer support system also gained access to files belonging to 134 customers, including 1Password, Beyond Trust, and yeah, that's so. Again, with these sorts of sophisticated supply chain attacks, we often find out about what's going on like quite a while after the thing happens. So this is the fallout from Cloudflare. We can expect potentially other fallout from other customers involved in this breach. All right, so this is a slap on the wrist if I ever saw one. The FTC is ordering Blackbaud to boost security after a huge data breach. So Blackbaud is a US-based company with operations in multiple countries and is a provider of cloud-based donor data. So this is catering to nonprofit organizations, charities, educational organizations, and healthcare agencies. And they suffered a huge data breach and are getting sued left and right for their bad security and false statements. So the FTC has been requiring companies to be very transparent about these breaches and like file information about the breach that makes it obvious to stakeholders like what's going on. They were sued as a result of misleading statements. And towards the bottom here, I saw that they have already agreed to pay $3 million to settle SEC charges, highlighting its failure to disclose the ransomware attack's full impact in those filings. They are a defendant in 23 proposed class action lawsuits related to the breach, and they have agreed to pay $49.5 million to settle a joint multi-state investigation of the breach backed by the attorney generals from 49 US states. This is, okay, so when I say slap on the wrist, I mean just this one thing from FTC that ordered them to improve their data security and also delete data after a certain period of time because apparently their data retention was just crazy was basically keeping data for a good amount of time, longer than was necessary, is what this FTC finding was alleging.
That's almost, I mean, that's a problem in general in the US or non-European countries. GDPR has much more strict guidelines around that data retention and only keeping it for when it's useful and using it only for the reason it was collected. We don't have a consistent legal framework. You know, individual states and things have it, but this story is again something that needs to push us to have like a universal data management law, you know, in the US, because you get it, you keep it forever. That's what we do. We use it for anything that we can mine data from. It's just how business works here.
Yeah, if there's no incentive to delete the data, then it tends to just hang around until it becomes part of a breach, is what it kind of seems like. And even if this data isn't used, it seems like this fine is designed to send a message saying, you know, if you're not using this data, it's in your best interest to delete it to avoid all of these consequences. But like you said, there's no legal reason to do that in the United States, in most states anyway. Whereas like some states like California are beginning to have some sorts of data protection. Like it was funny when I was in Europe for the last conference I went to, like getting that like ability to easily just say no to all cookies and every website just loaded just totally fine. I was like, what? Like, really? I really feel like I have no choice here. So yeah. All right, on to the next story. This another crypto story. So this is a Belarusian and a Cypriot national being indicted in the United States for his involvement in money laundering, effectively stealing a bunch of cryptocurrency from the platform that he was the administrator for. So being able to administer a platform means being able to, you know, like create accounts, move things around. And that is exactly what they did, laundering a bunch of stolen money. Let's see, stolen during the hack of Japanese crypto exchange platform Mt. Gox, which was one of the biggest ones ever, as well as ransom payments from Locky, Cerber, NotPetya, WannaCry, and Sopra ransomware operations. So, like, I have a more interesting crypto story though. So, you can probably sense my enthusiasm for like crypto related, but obviously these are the endpoints for a lot of like ransomware gangs and things like that who need to launder this money. So platforms like this make it so that people can get rich by administrating the stolen money from crimes. And obviously this is something the United States government is starting to go after more and more.
It's just funny that like there has to be a story about this, like somebody who's in the money laundering game and steals crypto, like this shouldn't be a surprise. Criminals do criminal things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I got an email about this one, and a bunch of other people probably did too. CISA is warning that this patched iPhone kernel bug is now being exploited in the wild. As we tend to see, once these attacks are patched, they kind of pass further and further down the food chain, and they're available to more and more people. They could be available as free proof of concepts, or they could be packaged as something that is only effective against older iPhones or iPhones that haven't received the security update yet. So it is becoming increasingly urgent to update these devices, as these hacking tools have gone from the realm of, like, you know, extremely expensive cyber mercenaries and started trickling down into things that are available to just about anyone. So really important to update iOS devices. Let's see, including Apple iPhones, Macs, TVs, and watches. So if you have not updated this, then you could be involved in these actively active exploits, which apparently are fairly easy to do. So arbitrary read and write capability, and maybe able to bypass pointer authentication. That's not good. So again, this mostly affects older devices. So iPad 8 and later, iPad Pro, all models, iPad Air, and basically all Apple devices. Just make sure to update these. I'm sure you've gotten some sort of notification about this, but stop ignoring it, because this one appears to be, you know, this is not just bug fixes. This is like an active attack. So Johnson Controls is being transparent about the cost of a recent ransomware attack. Less and less people are paying ransomware attacks. So ransomware like demands. So as a result, there are typically data breaches and loss of operational profits. And in this case, Johnson Controls is saying that it's about $27 million in expenses. This is over insurance and remediation and getting everything back up and running. But yeah, impact on net income for 3 months ended in December 31st of 2023, $27 million, according to the SEC filing. So these SEC filings are one of the only ways that we're able to get good clarity on the impacts of these attacks, because obviously nobody wanted to really talk about this before it became like a legal requirement for publicly traded companies to disclose this information. So it is interesting to see what the real financial cost is for these companies, because I believe the ransom demand here was more than that. So if you just do the math, $51 million to delete the data and provide a file decryptor versus $27 million to get up and running on their own, they got a deal.
I mean, the big thing that we're leaving out here is like the impact of the data stolen, depending on what they got. I mean, you can't unbreach data. So there is some value to that, be it, you know, intellectual property of the company, or, you know, if it's something much worse, you know what I mean? Like if there's PII or some other type of personal information involved in there. But if it's nothing like business confidential or doesn't affect human life, they absolutely got a deal on that. Recovering
you're
from
right.
back.
Because depending on what that information was, it could be proprietary company designs, which sets them back. They've factored that cost into that $27 million, or it could be like in information about employees or customers, which, you know, they can't really put a price tag on what the cost of that's going to be eventually. Anyway. All right. So we are seeing some pretty dramatic advice from CISA talking about Ivanti. Have you seen this one, Kilian?
I've seen a bunch of stories about Ivanti now. I think I read this one. When did this one come out? Yesterday? I think I read this one yesterday. But I know there's been a bunch of articles coming out about it.
Yeah, the first time I saw this was around January 31st, so a couple days ago, and Ivanti was warning of a new Connect Secure 0-day exploited in attack. So obviously, like a vulnerability is bad, but one exploited in attacks is worse. This 0-day vulnerability, server-side request forgery vulnerability, is incredibly severe and is involved in mass exploitation. So this is something where it is actively being exploited at scale. So this is to the point that CISA has said that you do not need to patch these anymore. You need to rip it out. And the remediation is just like disconnect it and do not use it. So this is this is one of the strongest responses I've seen from CISA on any attack in quite some time. So they're currently being targeted attacks, chaining a number of different vulnerabilities that allow attackers to gain full control and do and basically gain a foothold on a network that they absolutely should not have a foothold on. So unless we want to see like a dramatic fallout from this, it's critical that businesses that are running these Ivanti VPNs just disconnect them. And as of the publishing of this article, Shodan was seeing 22,000 Ivanti VPNs exposed online, which is a lot. It's a whole lot. So if the advice is to immediately disconnect this system, then you can bet that this is going to have a good amount of fallout. There's a very short timetable on this as well. Saturday, tomorrow, is the due date to have this done. So if you are a U.S. federal agency, get to it. Disconnect all of your Ivanti Connect Secure and Policy Secure VPN applications. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of work on Monday.
Yeah, I think it was in this article. They said this was like maybe the third actively exploited vulnerability or something like that. So it's not just one thing. It might be further up in this article, honestly.
Yeah, they were saying that.
There it is. Yeah.
So like chained together, these are especially problematic. Like one of these critical vulnerabilities is bad, but multiple of them all being vulnerable at the same time allows for some truly tricky and creative things. So obviously, like remote access to a bunch of people's critical networks, especially government agencies, is going to be a problem. So that is kind of explaining the dramatic response here, because all these devices potentially represent a beachhead into these organizations' networks.
That's the key thing to point out too, is I think a lot of security, we think about, endpoint and things like that. If you get access, if you can get in through, the remote access point like this, you kind of become an insider at that point, without having to necessarily go to the endpoint. You can move around laterally to them, but that's why these are so interesting, because you have a different set of controls. Like, you don't have endpoint controls on something like this.
James also mentions that this is going to cause a lot of disruption. Imagine all these like federal agencies, suddenly their VPNs shut down. Certain processes aren't going to work. A lot of people aren't going to be able to communicate with devices or back to their office, or be able to do certain critical things like check their email. So you can expect this, yes, to cause widespread disruptions with agencies that use this technology. So not only the attack, but also the abrupt taking down of this infrastructure is going to cause issues. Kurt also is kind of flabbergasted by the fact they're just like, rip it out. We have no suggestions on how to build it. Like, it's like it's more dangerous connected than it is disconnected. And it's like, right now, if you disconnect it, it'll stop working. If you leave it connected, potentially your whole network will stop working. Worse, So pretty dramatic guidance from a federal agency. All right, speaking of federal agencies, former DHS employees were jailed for stealing the data of 200,000 U.S. government workers, mostly postal employees. These were Department of Homeland Security employees who were working for the Office of the Inspector General, and they stole this information to provide it to an Indian development team in order to develop a competing product. So I guess this would be technically like corporate espionage. But these employees like stole the database, provided the information to like foreign developers, and then profited off of this. And then when caught, attempted to destroy the information, including communications with the developers and their copy of the data. But it did potentially expose identifiable information on a lot of federal employees, which is a big deal.
When I read through this, I didn't see what were they trying to build? Like they sold it, but like what was the competing product they were trying to compete against? Did it say?
They were trying to
sell a project to sell to government agencies. Okay.
So they're basically trying to take the existing databasing and like reverse engineer it and create something that was probably like reverse compatible with like what they already had in order to like sell them like a new product. Which is maybe a good business model if you're not engaging in corporate espionage and like exfiltrating the sensitive like information of like hundreds of thousands of like federal workers. So obviously that will get you in trouble. I'm kind of surprised by some of the sentences. 1.5 years in prison, 2
It's not
years of
much.
probation, and 4 months in prison. So for exposing the potential, the personal information of all these federal employees,
Mm-hmm.
I've seen worse for stealing hay, is what I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
All right, on to the next. So this is a little bit of an unusual like twist on some of the classic scams. At this point, like if you see like if you see like a vulnerable person, like a senior citizen who's at like a counter buying a bunch of gift cards, like people
Right.
are asking questions. They're like,
Yeah.
hey,
Yeah.
did somebody online ask you to send this? Do you know them? Because these scams are so rampant,
Yeah.
especially targeting senior citizens with these like weird tech scams. And some of
Mm-hmm.
these are like Bitcoin scams, but the crux of this is scammers convince these people to liquidate their assets, and then they try to get them to send that to them. And
Yeah.
it's a cat and mouse game because this is so widespread now that like, grocery stores and stores that sell these gift cards are on the lookout for these scams. There's signs up when you buy the gift cards warning you about this. There's like, if you go into a Western Union and try to send money to just a random person, they have like a whole speech to give you.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's become harder and harder for these criminals to get away with this sort of thing. But now they're using couriers in order to get around this. So these are like professional couriers that will show up and collect the goods and kind of make it seem more authentic by that scammers will like give them like a password to give to the courier to make sure that the courier is who they say they are. But this is just another stage in the scam that makes it seem more legitimate. So it's an attempt to get around the problem of like these gift cards now being more heavily monitored, and instead getting people to like put gold bars in a suit in like I don't know, like a pillowcase, and hand it over to one of these couriers who then proposes that they're gonna like turn it into Bitcoin or investment, and then instead just takes it and never contacts them again.
Could we put it into a pillowcase with a $sign painted on it? Like if we're just going to commit to this scam, like Looney Tune style?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a pretty brazen brazen thing, but using like legitimate couriers to do this is making it so that it's harder for this attack to be visible. The normal points you would expect it to be. But now couriers are going to be saddled with the burden of trying to establish whether this elderly person giving over their valuables actually knows what's going on, or if they're a victim of a scam.
I feel like, I don't know. I feel like common sense says like it's almost always a scam. This was making me laugh a second ago.
Yeah. That's what I'm like. They have like I've seen stores where they locked up the gift cards, and you have to talk to like a manager who assesses like the situation before like issuing you a gift card. They used to be you could just grab them, on the way out, but they have been removed from circulation. Like at least in some of the stores I've been in, where they're now behind the counter. You have to get one for a couple of reasons. One of them is people were like swiping them and like getting the number on them and stuff, like and then just pinging it and waiting to see when someone bought it and then just draining them, which I think is a hilarious attack. So like if you knew about that and would just get a gift card and then like have it just mysteriously have no money on it for a while, like people like stores would leave out these gift cards and hackers would just go and like swipe them, and then as soon as one of them was registered, they would just use that gift card like repeatedly. So kind of one of the reasons why those gift cards were like no longer allowed to be left out. But these scams also another part. All right, so a mishandled GitHub token was exposed on the personal GitHub repo of a Mercedes-Benz employee, and that allowed unrestricted access to their source code. So this happens kind of all the time, but having an accidental leak of credentials that allow unrestricted and unmonitored access to the entire source code repository is a big deal. It means adversaries can get access to that. They can start probing around for vulnerabilities. They can probably learn a lot. So this is incredibly common. There's a lot of tools out there for looking for these exposed or leaked credentials. It seems like it was found relatively quickly, but this does happen all of the time. And that is why when I use CircuitPython, I try to teach people to save all their secrets in a separate file. So when they commit their code, they're not committing like their home password and other stuff that usually you have to strip out manually. It's just kind of a coding problem.
We've definitely seen that in the corporate world too. How often the secrets get uploaded unintentionally. I mean, I know GitHub has some scanning capabilities for it, and we at Varonis can also discover those in a number of places. but it's shocking how common it really is. Because you wouldn't think it, but it's the keys to the kingdom.
James says we should require senior citizen to be accompanied by a minor for gift card and tech purchases. I think that evens it out. Honestly, I think that
Sure.
like between the two of them, they can get to the bottom of what's going on. I like that system. I think the buddy system there is good. So, all right. So we had a hacker that we talked about a while ago who was hacking into psychiatric or psychotherapy clinics and getting patient information and attempting to extort the clinic. And then when the clinic didn't pay, they were going after patients and threatening to release notes. Obviously, that was a pretty big deal and kind of a sadistic attack. So it got some people involved who have, and I quote, sensitive proprietary investigative techniques to uncover who was responsible for this. So Monero has been touted as a untraceable cryptocurrency, but it's not. And using techniques that are apparently proprietary, it was possible to uncover who was responsible for this particular attack. So what looks like happened was Bitcoin was extracted, stolen, or whatever else, and this person put it into Monero, tossed that Monero around, put it back into Bitcoin, and then connected it to a wallet that was associated with an email address of a server that he controlled. Was the chain that they were able to follow here. So let's see, what did they describe it as? They did not disclose the exact mechanism for tracing Monero transactions, citing the need to protect sensitive investigative techniques that can provide invaluable in future cases. But the general thing that seems to be done was figuring out traffic flow kind of like information, like, and also doing correlation. So like the correlation I think was like the easiest thing to kind of infer from this, where like if a certain amount of money goes in and then it gets all mixed around, and then a certain very similar or identical amount of money at the same time pops out the other end in someone's account, you can anonymize it all you want, but like it makes it pretty clear that there's a correlation there if you're able to like monitor and correlate both sides of the transaction. So not totally clear what the investigative technique here is, aside from like good old correlation attack, which has been tripping up hackers for a very long time. But it does seem like we have an update in that case involving the hacker going after psychiatric notes and like therapy notes. Like this is something that the government put a lot of resources into and managed to get through the untraceable reputation of Monero to actually get a suspect in these attacks. All right, so this was a recent one that I saw a lot about. Is there another one? Yes. So CISA put out an advisory begging people operating small office and home office routers to secure them. They were saying that these frequently have the default credentials left in place. This is true. This is very true. And it's kind of honestly disrupting like my good day because I have, since being a teenager, relied on the terrible security of small home / office, small like office routers that are the kind of the backbone of many of these small like coffee shops, like small businesses. They provide internet access and they are misconfigured. Like they are just not set up right in the vast majority of cases because it's hard. These places don't have their own IT professionals. These are supposed to be out of the box things that are set up, but they're vulnerable out of the box and are frequently not set up to update automatically. I cannot tell you how many times I've walked into a restaurant or a coffee shop or some business where their primary business is not providing internet and found out that their router has not been updated since the early 2000s or or something else crazy. Like the amount of uptime on these routers without being updated is wild. And sometimes it's like a message board where I can go in and see all the other people with IT knowledge who have just found that there's no password to access the logs of this router and just looked through everything and be like, wow, a lot of people have been in this router since it was like last booted in like 2009. So these have become a huge problem and are becoming like a source of Chinese infrastructure attacks where like China will start like probing like our like power or water or some other system, and they will hide that network traffic in a sophisticated botnet that is constructed from these vulnerable small home and small office routers. So CISA was sending out a request first to start making these more secure by default from manufacturers, and also to attempt to get the individuals who now possess these to update them. But at a certain point, the FBI was just like, you know what, we're just going to do this. So the FBI went ahead and sent out commands to devices infected by this botnet. What is it? Volts Typhoon, which are state-based hackers. And the idea here was to erase the malware, reboot the devices, and then lock out hackers from future attacks. So every once in a while, we see that the government just kind of like decides that it's fine to push a patch, and just like decide that attacking the botnet is worth the potential risk of rebooting or disconnecting or causing damage to like a critical system that they're interacting with. So it's not very often that you see the government, like a government agency, like attack a botnet by force updating like an absolute ton of routers. But CISA and the FBI are working together on this one to try to, I guess, work it on both sides, so that in general the problem is worked on from the ground up, where these class of devices are like treated as potential vulnerabilities more and more, and that also I actually have to send this to someone I know who has a vulnerable router running at their business. But you know, like this is something where if you're an owner of this device, you need to recognize that it's critical that it gets updated, or you might get a call from the FBI. And if you're a manufacturer, you need to be aware that these are increasingly becoming a national security issue, and you know, you need to do better when it comes to having default credentials. You know, like the good ones, for example, will like have like a default credential that's based on like a physical attribute, like the serial number printed on the back of the device. And I'm like, oh, well, that's it, you know. But the bad ones will have like a default credential that's always the same and frequently not changed. And if it's publicly accessible, then that makes it a real problem. And honestly, like you could just have people travel around the United States, attack these things that are vulnerable locally, and just connect them. And that would not be a significant effort to go around and create a botnet manually if need be, even if these aren't vulnerable to remote attacks. So yeah, interesting to see that the government went to the point of actually pushing this out and being like, okay, we're done waiting. Like this is over.
I'm glad in 2024 we still have the exact same thing that, like, I'm sure, Kody, you and I probably did in high school, where we logged onto somebody's network, or hey, my internet's not working. You go on Google, look up the default username and password, log in, and fix whatever it is.
It's the only way to do it. It's the only way to do it. And with ChatGPT now, I can take a picture of a router and be like, can you tell me the default password for this router? And it'll go find it for me. So like, you know, the days of obscurity being equaling security are done. Like you can't just have just expect that the average person won't have time to look up the default credentials, or that the average user will have time to change those default credentials. Those days are done. So if you have a product that has the same password every time and it's supposed to be a secure product, then you got problems, because most people are never going to change that. And it represents a platform that can be used for anything. In this case, a state-based actor that may be trying to turn off your water. All right. So I believe this is going to be the last one for today. This is so for a while when I was running Nullbyte, the YouTube channel, I was in charge of content moderation for our comments, and I would get, you know, a lot of weird comments, but some of them were just long base-60 forward strings and like you know, like hashes and stuff like that. And it's just like, get this out of here. Like I don't know what this is. I don't like it. I was like, are you using me as like a C2 platform? Like what's going on? So the answer was probably yes, actually. So threat actors have been using so all right, so the way this starts is you get a USB device, which has a link file that tries to pull down information from the internet. Now, usually these campaigns can be traced pretty easily because they're able to be like, you know, referenced to some GitHub file or whatever that is hosting the payload. But in this case, the threat actor has used things like Ars Technica, GitHub, Vimeo, and other platforms that allow you to upload strings. In this case, you can see this person created a Vimeo profile that has like this long base-60 forward string. And this string is actually a payload that when you plug in this malicious USB and open the link file, this goes to that like Ars Technica or like the Vimeo profile or comment or whatever, grabs that string and then decodes it and runs it as a malicious payload. So that means that you can have a USB device that can get scanned and has nothing malicious on it, but when it reaches out, it's able to grab, download, parse, and execute a malicious payload that's being hidden in plain sight. So I always deleted these things because I was just like, you're trying to host a payload or something. I don't like it. Like I feel like I'm like part of some like attack chain that I don't want to be a part of. But yes, if you run a website that allows comments, your web, and this is actually kind of funny also because I have a friend of mine was working on like data scraping and like mass posting and stuff and seeing like what's possible and what's not possible. And it was very easy to create a bunch of accounts and post a bunch of comments on most default websites where, you know, it's set up to allow comments on like a blog or something, like someone's like personal blog that's been abandoned. So these sorts of platforms that allow for comments get those sorts of like weird automated comments all the time. And sometimes they end up being like a way that threat actors can seed like malicious payloads all over the internet and make it really hard for it to be taken down. Because if you have a comment on some like you know, baking blog that's been abandoned since like 2018, like what is the process for getting that taken down? You know, it makes the process for removing payloads from the internet and breaking the infrastructure of the malware a lot more complicated. So I'm seeing this more and more, and it's something that as a content creator is very annoying because we basically have to like delete all of these dumb comments in order to get rid of like hidden PowerShell commands that are embedded in some of these just like comments, profiles, and other things in, I guess, just like regular infrastructure.
Yeah. That's smart though. I mean, for as much as I hate to admit it, like that's a really clever idea.
It is really clever. I mean, we're kind of seeing like the same trend, right? With like the Chinese APT group taking advantage of these like home office routers that are just out there, vulnerable and easy to take over, and then using it as infrastructure. Like if you create a blog that lets people post data, then you're going to get hackers who are like, cool, I can host data here. And they'll just post these big long strings that end up being useful for them to then reference in later attacks. And the process of like law enforcement or somebody else getting a takedown notice for like 7, 10, 20 different websites, all hosted on different providers running different technologies that could be abandoned as well. That is truly difficult to take down and makes it so these malicious payloads can be hosted online in pretty resilient ways.
Yeah, and I mean, you can't even really block it either. Like Ars Technica, like you're not gonna, you know, as a business, you're not gonna block that because it's something so common. And how do you differentiate the malicious, you know, payload data in the comments versus someone trying to research an article?
Yeah, someone in our chat is plotting some sort of attack in which they are using droppers embedded in a series of blogs. That's pretty. I'm sure you're kidding. But that is what people are doing nowadays. Like, you know, like if you can leave payloads in blogs, or another very common thing is using blogs like and other things as a C2 server. So literally you'll see two bots communicating with themselves like in the comments of like a discussion post. And like, you know, sometimes it's like concealed a little bit. Well, they'll like be arguing with each other, but then like there'll be some random data as well. And other times it's just like blah blah, like, you know, just like code, like exchange back and forth. But literally like using like living off the land and like using abandoned or unmonitored infrastructure to host C2 servers or droppers or other things, it's becoming increasingly common. So yeah, malware developers love this one trick that security companies hate. Because like you said, like who wants to block Ars Technica or like other tech, like, you know, like it's harder to block these sorts of domains, and it's harder to like knock them down or detect them because they're legitimate infrastructure or they're legitimate websites that have just been compromised or are offering the ability to temporarily store data. All right, so that's all I have for today. Kilian, thank you for joining us today and hanging out for our little LoRa demonstration. I'm thinking of making some like some LoRa like attack modules where like I can take like a regular like USB nugget and have it do like USB attacks from like a mile or 2 miles away. And I'm going to see how that could work. But yeah, overall, a lot of interesting stories, especially the ones that are like requiring swift action from federal agencies. The ripping out of the VPN and then also the rebooting or the cleansing of all of these routers by the FBI is a set of like pretty like stern like government responses to like cybersecurity incidents. So it's interesting to see the government kind of stepping in both these ways and really getting involved in some of these ongoing cyber attacks. So I don't think that I saw as much involvement in some of these attacks, like going back like 3-4 years.
No.
So it seems like CISA and then like the FBI is increasingly being involved in managing the like, I don't want to say industrial, but the commercial or like the non-governmental side of some of these attacks as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the times that I can think of in my mind is a couple years ago with the big exchange issue. I think the FBI took action and logged in and reconfigured them. And then was it I feel like there was something around the time of Eternal Blue that they did something to. Don't quote me on that, but those are the two big incidents. And again, that was twice in the last, whatever, 10 years, let's call it, or something like that, versus a couple times fairly recently.
Yeah, pretty unusual. It is pretty unusual to see. And of course, if you want to go back to the start of the stream and learn more about the vulnerability that Varonis security researchers found that exposes NTLM hashes, check this out. You can go to varonis.com/Kody. That's Kody. It also lets Varonis know that you're watching the stream, support it, and that we should keep doing it. So we definitely appreciate it. And you can learn a little bit about the process the researchers used to make this discovery. I think that finding sneaky ways of making external calls within the system is really interesting and really cool. I learned a lot about the way that these protocols are exchanged and the way they're supposed to work versus the way that they've been tricked into working. So if you want to learn a little bit about the ways that clicking on a link could potentially leak your password, this is it. So check it out, varonis.com/Kody. And as always, thank you to everybody in our chat. It's good to see James and everybody else participating, asking some great questions and also giving us some insight on some of these things as we go through them. So we will see everyone again on Wednesday for the Q&A session. So if you have a question and it didn't get answered in the stream, make sure to leave it on the YouTube channel. And you can also leave it in our Discord server. I will drop the link in there in just a second. But good to see everyone, and I'll see you all Wednesday. Goodbye, everyone.
Take care.